Okay, so yes, my name is Rahul Mitchell, and I'm going to be giving you a bit of an introduction to product management today. Before we get started, better turn this on. Before we get started, let me just give you a brief introduction to me. I originally studied physics about 20 years ago, and not long after graduating, got a job at a company called Sun Microsystems, who were a big technology infrastructure player back in the late 90s, benefited greatly from the dot-com boom, suffered greatly in the dot-com collapse, stayed with them for a good 8 years, worked for them in the UK but also in Silicon Valley, before coming back to the UK and joining Google. I was with Google for 9 years, again in a few different locations, started out in London, then moved to Sydney in Australia, and then finally in San Francisco. And it was while I was at Google that I made the move into product management. Was with Google for 9 years, and then early last year came back to the UK and joined a company called Crowdcube, who are an equity crowdfunding startup. We're actually based in the southwest of England, unusually, although we also have an office just down the road here in London. And I joined Crowdcube to basically set up a product management team and lead that team. Okay, so why am I here today? So the first job I had when I joined Crowdcube was to start hiring some people. And while I was at Google, I worked with a mixture of experienced product managers and people who joined Google through their graduate recruitment and training scheme for product managers, which is called the Associate Product Management Program. And that's quite well respected, and I worked with a lot of... no problem, come in. I worked with a number of different people who were on that program, and they were really impressive. They were really had a lot of potential, very effective. So when I was looking to build my own team, I was keen to include a few undergraduates or graduates in that team. And so I posted this job, and my expectation was that it would be hard to find some experienced people, because I needed some experienced people as well. But at least with the entry-level role, I had a big audience to go out to and hopefully find some good people. But actually it turned out to be extremely difficult to fill this position, because it turns out there's very little awareness of product management as a career in this country. It hasn't really taken off as a career path. So this worried me, because as hopefully you'll understand as we go through this presentation, it's quite a central role to modern technology companies. And the startup scene in the UK has really exploded while I was away. And more companies are starting up all the time, and these companies all need product managers, and there just isn't really a pipeline of people coming up through the role. You tend to find most people move into product management midway through their careers, like I did. They stumble over it at some point and think, oh, it's interesting, I'll do that. And that's a bit of a concern. So my goal here is not to persuade you to work for Crowdcube or even over-glamorize product management. I just want to introduce you to the role, help you understand what it is, decide for yourself whether it's right for you. And even if it's not, it's quite likely, especially if you go into technology companies, that you will end up working with product managers at some point. And it'd be good for you to understand what you're up against. Okay, so basic structure of this presentation. What is a product manager? And then a little bit about understanding why you might enjoy being a product manager and understanding whether it's right for you. And then lastly, some tips on how you get started in the role. Before I start though, just so I don't waste your time, how many people have heard of product management before now? Okay, how many people feel like they understand what it is? I rest my case. All right, okay, let's kick off. So, what is a product manager? I should stress that, as you can probably tell from my background, I'll be focusing on the role of a product manager specifically in technology companies. And in fact, if you go and do a search for product management or product manager online, you'll find most of the material, most of the discussions and the communities are around technology companies. Sometimes that's referred to as digital product management, just because it's beginning as a discipline to expand out beyond the sort of pure technology realm. And so sometimes people feel the need to caveat it that way. This is sort of an obvious slide, but before we talk about product management, we just need to define what we mean by a product. And that's pretty straightforward. Any sort of hardware, software, or service that you might provide to consumers or businesses. So any product that fits that description may have a product manager or may benefit from having a product manager. So what does that person do? Well, if you're going to sum it up in one phrase, you would say they own the success of the product. And I realise that that's not particularly detailed description. We'll go into it in more detail in a moment. But ultimately, their job is to figure out what it will take for that product to succeed by whatever definition of success that product has. The best analogy, or my favourite analogy, is that of a conductor of an orchestra. So the conductor of an orchestra decides what pieces the orchestra will play, and then leads all the musicians to collectively deliver the best performance possible. They don't actually play an instrument themselves, but they're a central function in delivering that experience. Similarly, product managers define what product should be built, and then they coordinate all the different functions involved in delivering the best user experience possible. So let's break that down into those two halves. There's the planning stage, deciding what should be built, and then there's the delivery stage, actually getting it built and making it successful. So the planning stage is really about, as I say, deciding what should be built. And this is essentially a pretty straightforward, this is a pretty standard kind of business strategy exercise. So the first thing is you need to understand what does it mean for this product to be successful? What is it trying to achieve? What are its goals? Why does it exist? What problems is it trying to solve? And that's sort of the vision for the product. Like, how will the world be better once this product does what you intend it to do? Once you've got that vision, you can evangelise that vision, you can take it out to people and say, this is what I think we should do. I think this will be valuable and useful. And then you can figure out, okay, what's our strategy for actually doing that? How are we going to get from where we are to where we want to be? That in turn will lead you to a roadmap, a sequence of milestones, releases, updates that actually deliver on that strategy. And then each of those releases will be made up of a set of specific requirements you're trying to solve, which we normally package up as what we call user stories, which is a way of describing a requirement without necessarily opining on the implementation in any way. You just describe the user behaviour you're looking to facilitate. So an example user story might be, as a rail commuter, I want to be able to carry my ticket on my phone. And that's it, that's a requirement. But it doesn't actually in any way dictate how that's going to happen. So it's this package of requirements that you end up negotiating and working with engineers and designers to agree on, and then working with them to actually implement. So as the product manager for a given product, you own that whole stack. You own the strategy, the vision, and then getting people to buy into that and agree this is the way to go, figuring out how you're going to make it happen, and then laying out the actual step-by-step route from where you are to delivering on that. Once you've done that, then you can move into delivery. And your role there is a little bit different. So the first thing is you manage the schedule. In other words, you've laid out this set of releases, you've laid out this plan, now you have to actually try and keep everybody on that schedule. And often that means figuring out what is holding things up, what is stopping progress, and getting to the bottom of those problems and solving them. This is kind of classical project management. And people often ask, well, what's the difference between a project manager and a product manager? So project managers essentially just do this piece. They just do managing the schedule, resolving dependencies, keeping all the lines of communication flowing, keeping stakeholders updated, and that sort of thing. Very important role. And at large companies, you'll find they will hire dedicated project managers who you will pair up with, which is a total godsend, because it's not the most fun part of the job. So having someone to do that is great. But at smaller companies, at startups, you tend to find that burden falls on the product managers. So you're the maker of trivial decisions. And what I mean by this is, on a day-to-day basis, as you're building some great new product, no matter how carefully and in how much detail you've specified how it should behave, questions come up all the time. Little questions, potentially trivial questions. What should the label be on this button? What colour should this background be? In this obscure corner case where someone has already done this, how should the product behave? And these are the sort of decisions which, although individually are not that important, unless someone is empowered to make them, everything just grinds to a halt. And so as the product manager, you become that person. Engineers, designers can just come to you and say, what do you think? Because you are the person who owns the success of the product, you are the person who should care most deeply about the quality of the product. You're the first person to test it, you're the first person to use it. You're the person who tries to build strong arguments for why it's worth spending a little bit more time to do it a little bit better, to polish it a little bit more, to improve that user experience. You tend to find that great product managers, they become kind of emotionally attached to their products. They're kind of their babies. And if they are not doing well, or if they're getting criticised in the press, or if users are unhappy, it kind of hurts at some emotional level because you feel that strong attachment to the product. Next up, coordinating launches. So we talked about the planning stage, we talked about delivery, but at some point you have to ship. Nothing you've done has any value in the world until it actually ships. And coordinating launches is a complex beast. There's a lot of moving parts. There's obviously making sure that the product is ready, but there's also the marketing. Like, how are you going to message this? Go-to-market strategy. Do you have your terms and conditions, your privacy policy, your security issues all sorted out? Are you essentially ready to go when the time comes? And it's your job to make sure that's the case. Something that may not be obvious from everything I've said is that as a product manager, you manage products, you don't manage people. Despite the fact that you work with all these different teams and functions, you don't actually have organizational authority over any of them. Your job is one of persuasion, of influence. You don't have authority, you can't dictate what happens. You have to build consensus, you have to build a case, a data-driven case ideally, for why things should be done a certain way. So a lot of it is about communication, it's about building trust, and it's about deeply understanding what your users need and what the business needs. Okay, so that's the basic outline of the role. Any questions so far? All right, good. All right, so let's talk about whether this is something you might enjoy. So I'm going to start with one of the exercises I've been doing recently to support this presentation is interviewing successful product managers and talking to them a little bit about how did you get into the role, why do you enjoy it, what advice would you have for people who are interested in it. This guy is fairly well known in the product management community worldwide. He's a guy called Marty Kagan. He was originally a product manager at Netscape, which was like the original browser company. And then he went on to eBay. He was a senior product management director, I think, at eBay for many years. These days, he's based out of Silicon Valley, and he does consulting and teaching about product management. And I went to one of his workshops last year, and afterwards I sat him down and we had a chat. And I just want to play you a little snippet of something he said I thought was interesting about the role. I'm hoping this works.
It's an amazing job, and I think there's a very strong argument to say it is the most important non-executive position in a company. It's really second only to the CEO, and that is, you can't say that about a lot of jobs, and a lot of people have found that this is not only a great job and a great career, but it's a proving ground for eventually starting their own company. In fact, a lot of the best investors out there will only invest in someone who has proven they can be a product manager successfully.
Okay, so the basic argument is that if you look at the way particularly young companies work, when they're first founded, you have a founder who's normally the CEO and maybe a co-founder, and they have a vision for the product, and they build that product up. But they get to a point where they're getting some success in the market, they've found product market fit. Now they're having to worry about raising finance for the company, they're having to worry about building an executive team, a lot of hiring. There's a lot of distractions that begin to come in, and they begin to lose time to actually just focus on the product and make it great. And that's when they bring a product management team in, or a product leader. And that person picks up a lot of that responsibility from them to make this a great product, and that's why it's such an important role in the company. It's sort of the right-hand man of the CEO. In case the audio didn't work, I made a slide with the words on. And now another one, this is a different guy, someone I've interviewed recently, more junior. He's a product manager at Judil, who are a London-based startup that do business intelligence software and data and analytics. He graduated only a year or so ago, and I asked him why he enjoys product management.
So it's really seeing, if you want to kind of summarize it in one action or whatever, it's seeing the smile on people's faces when you've solved their problem. There's nothing better than seeing that happen. I think there's a lot of work that goes into building something, but during that journey you learn so much about the problem you're solving, who you're solving it for. And working with a team is one of the best things you can do. It is working towards a common goal, but not necessarily it being predefined. It's not in a sort of agency model. No, someone doesn't say, I want an e-commerce website built. It's, hey, here's a problem, how can we fix it? And in that regard, it's quite a creative role as well as one where you have to hunker down as much as you can. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a chance to help people, it's a chance to solve problems, it's quite creative, but it's also quite analytical because there's a data element to it. And something that really mattered to me, something that really attracted me to the role, was a sense that you were doing something worthwhile, that you were contributing something concrete, that you were helping people. So you've probably got a sense of this already, but one of the consequences of this coordinating function is that you end up working with an enormous number of different roles within a company. You spend a lot of time with engineering, a lot of time with the design team. You're also the main person who's responsible for keeping the leadership team updated as to the progress of projects and products. But you also have all these other stakeholders around the edges, obviously the customers, business development, sales. And when it comes to launch, you have to worry about support readiness, about PR, about, as I say, the legal side of it. So you get exposure to all these different teams. They're all very different people. They're all fascinating people, very different styles, very different communication styles. And you get to learn a little bit about all these areas. You get to understand the things that lawyers are sensitive about. You get to understand the way that marketing go about messaging some new product. And I'm not suggesting you become an expert in any of these roles, but you get to know a little bit about all of them. And that's why it's such a useful sort of starting point for someone who might be interested in starting their own company eventually. Because you just have that complete 360-degree perspective on what's happening around the product and around the business. Okay, there's also a lot of roles, a lot of places you can go from product management. Obviously, product management has its own career ladder. You can become more senior, you can go to director level eventually, you become a VP of product or a chief product officer. But also, you can move around very easily. These are very transferable skills. One of the reasons it was so easy for me to move from Sydney to San Francisco, and from San Francisco to London, is because anywhere there's technology companies, they need product managers. In fact, Google survey all of their product managers worldwide every 6 months and ask them if they'd be interested in moving to another office. And if you say yes, they will move you anywhere in the world where they need product managers, because they believe that that cross-pollination of ideas and of culture is really essential. So you can obviously go to large technology companies, you can go to small ones, you can move between them. You tend to find a lot of people learn their trade at a big company and then will go to a startup and experience that life. Also, as Marty mentioned, a lot of people go on to found their own companies. And I've got a few examples here of people who have kind of fairly well-known people who've gone on from product management and used that as a springboard to success elsewhere. This guy called Brett Taylor, he was original product manager for Google Maps. I fully confess a lot of these are quite Google-centric because these are the people I know. He was a product manager on Google Maps. Founded a company called FriendFeed. They got acquired by Facebook. He became CTO of Facebook, and then after a while left and founded another company, which he's running now, called Quip. This is Kevin Systrom, who was a product manager at Google, and then another company called Nextstop, and then went and founded Instagram. Jess Lee, she was on the APM program at Google, and then founded. She's now the CEO of Polyvore, who are a fashion startup. Steph Hannon, she was a PM on Google on Gmail, and then on Maps, and then on Google Wave, and is now Chief Technology Officer of Hillary Clinton's election campaign. Marissa, famously one of Google's first product managers, and was the product manager for Google Search for many years, now the CEO of Yahoo, and was the person who originally founded that Associate Product Manager program I mentioned, and has now taken it with her and started one at Yahoo as well. And then, of course, Sundar, who was originally product manager for Chrome when that launched, the Chrome browser. Because that went well, he was given Google Apps. That went well, so he was given an Android, and now he's CEO of Google. So he's doing all right. So you can see it's not that unusual for people who are in product management roles to go on to either senior leadership positions in those companies or other companies, or start their own thing. All right, so hopefully that's a kind of a taste of some of the benefits of this as a career path. Oh, there's one important benefit I forgot to mention, which is you do get paid to do this. This is some numbers I pulled from a report. I admit that it's a few years old. The numbers are adjusted for inflation. The organisation that created it are running a new survey right now, and so I hope to have fresh numbers. But these aren't too far off my expectations of the salary expectations at these different points. So you would expect to start in a junior or entry level role. These are median salaries, so you may not start exactly on that. And you're normally a junior product manager for 2 to 3 years. The product manager and senior product manager functions, there's no real strong industry standard as to when you move from one to the other, but that whole group probably spans, I would say, 7 to 9 years, something like that. And then obviously you get into leadership positions at that point. On top of that, obviously, at startups you might expect to have an equity component as well. And then all the other things like food and massage, goodness knows what else. Okay, so I talked a little bit about why you might, this is a summary, sorry, yes, I've rearranged these slides, I've just remembered. So, a quick summary of the last few slides, reasons why I think product management is a great career. You get a lot of responsibility, but you also have a lot of autonomy. So you can decide for yourself how you're going to go about making your product successful, but it is up to you to do that. I think it's a meaningful function. You get a sense you're doing something worthwhile. You work with a lot of interesting people. Your skill set that you develop is very broad and very easy to transfer. You have an unusually broad perspective on the business and on everything that's going on. Lots of long-term options, and the role is definitely highly valued and well compensated. I also think it's a great deal of fun. I genuinely enjoy it. I think it's if you love solving problems, you love working with people, you love making stuff, it's a really good combination of those things. It's probably worth us mentioning, though, that I'm not going to pretend that product management is right for everybody. There are certainly certain key characteristics you see in good product managers. And so I'm going to rattle through those right now. I'm not suggesting that you have to have all of these characteristics in order to start into this role. In fact, you could see this as a list of characteristics you will likely develop if you become a product manager, so it might be appealing in that sense. But certainly from my perspective as someone who's hired a lot of product managers, there are certain things I recognise as strengths and good signs when you're looking for people. It's a leadership role. And I mentioned that it's not a leadership in the sense of managing people. You don't have that authority. It's leadership in the sense of showing people the way, giving people a sense of direction, inspiring them, making them feel confident that the product's in good hands, being willing to fight through any challenges that come up. Communication is essential. If anything, I'd say empathy is the most critical skill as a product manager, because you have to be able to empathise with your users, you have to understand what they need. You also have to empathise with your colleagues, because within a business, within a company, everybody is operating under their own set of incentives, everybody's operating under their own pressures, and you have to understand that in all of your dealings with them, and in order to understand how they're likely to respond or interpret their behaviour. Energy is essential. So you have to believe in this product, you have to be passionate about it, you have to keep things moving. And what you tend to find is that the team around a product manager, the engineers, the designers, the testers, the support people, they will take their cues in terms of their mental state, their morale, from the product manager. If you start to look a bit down, they'll come down with you. If you stay up, they'll stay up with you. So you have to be positive, you have to be optimistic. There's a pragmatic element to this. I mentioned about managing the schedule and the project management side of things. So you've got to be organised, you've got to cope well under pressure when you've got a week left and there's a million things to get done. There's the creative side. You've got to be able to recognise a good product when you see one. You've got to be able to recognise ways in which your product can improve. You have to potentially have new ideas for things that you could do to help the business, or new directions you should go in. But at the same time, you have to be a bit data-driven, because you'll tend to find, particularly when you're working with engineers, they're not just going to take what you tell them at face value, because you're not their manager. You have to build a case, and the strongest cases are those that are backed with good data. So you have to deeply understand the data, you have to understand user behaviour, both in aggregate, so looking at analytics or collecting information from logs, but also on an individual basis. We do a lot of user research. We actually sit down with individual users and we talk them through how they use the product. So you can be curious. You've got to, be the sort of person who thinks about how things could be better or what you might be able to do. The one thing I always sort of say when I show this slide is that I was a bit hesitant to put opinionated on here because it has negative connotations, and I don't really mean that. It's just I haven't found a better word yet. What I mean is you need to be the sort of person who has opinions, like who forms them, and then is comfortable expressing them. It's not okay to just sort of sit there and grumble to yourself that things are not the way you think they should be. But lastly, you have to be humble. You have to be, despite the fact that you're a leader and you're hopefully outgoing and you have these opinions, you have to be willing to accept when you're wrong. You have to be willing to change your mind. You have to recognize value in the opinions of others. And that's essential, again, to building strong relationships. Okay. So far, so good? Excellent. All right. So if you're interested in this as a role, if you wanted to do this, how would you go about that? How would you become a product manager? So there's sort of two main paths. There's the big company route and there's the small company route. And the big companies, they will have dedicated graduate recruitment and training programs for product managers. Google's, I've mentioned a few times, has sort of set the template for the industry, the APM program. It's a 2-year program in which, on top of training, you get rotated through 2 different teams. So you're in one team for a year and then another team for a year. In that time, you will actually own a real product. You're not just an apprentice, you're actually doing the job. They also obviously give you a lot of training. They also take you on a 2 or 3 week world trip to take you to other offices, to take you to other cultures, sort of try and understand the need to build products that are not just for your country or people you know well. Facebook have a program called the Rotational Product Management Program, which is similar. It's slightly quicker. They do 3 rotations over each of 6 months. Facebook is actually a significantly smaller company in terms of people than Google at the moment. So it's a bit more fast moving as a result. Yahoo have a program that's almost identical to Google's because it's just a straightforward cut and paste of Google's. The people who set it up were all people who set up the Google one. Microsoft is a little unusual, a little different, because they have had a function. If you look at product management as a role, it really began to sort of hit the mainstream, if you like, I would say, around early to mid 2000s. But Microsoft have had a similar role for a lot longer than that, except they call it something else. They call it a program manager. And they still do. So if you were looking to be what we're describing here today, at Microsoft, you would look for program manager roles. But just to keep things confusing, the other companies on this list also have a role called program manager that is not what we're talking about here. It's more of a project management role. So just be a bit careful about that. So that's one route. Now, I should stress that all of these programs are very well respected and will give you a great grounding in product management, but they are also extremely, there's a lot of contention for these positions. Their annual intakes are not that large. And so I recognise that it might not be easy to get into those programs. So another route is to go the small company route. In fact, there's been a lot of articles I've read recently saying that actually the very best place to learn your skills as a product manager is not at a big company. And it's not also at a very, very young company. It's somewhere in between. It's a company that is maybe got a product that's being successful, they're growing quickly, they're maybe on the order of 1,000 or so people. Someone like Uber, for example, would be a good example. Because you will get a lot of responsibility because the company's growing so quickly and they're desperate for people. And things are moving fast, you'll learn a lot. So where would you find those kinds of roles? So I've listed a few places that you could look at here that I'd recommend. Work in Startups is a great site, has a lot of opportunities on it. It does look a bit ghetto, like it was built in the early 90s or something, but it does work. And actually when we listed jobs on that site, we had a good response. AngelList is the sort of the new hot place for people for technology companies to publish and recruit people. And that's definitely worth a look. Mind the Product are an interesting organisation based here in the UK, based in London, who are becoming the de facto worldwide product management community. They run a conference called Mind the Product in London in September. They've just started running in San Francisco as well. They also organise Product Tank, which are city-based meetups for product managers. There's one in London every month. There are now hundreds, literally, of these around the world. And they also have a jobs board that they've just started up. And then lastly, LinkedIn. LinkedIn obviously is the default place to look for jobs and find jobs. Recruiters live and die by LinkedIn these days. It's a double-edged sword though, because I can tell you that from a recruitment perspective, the problem with LinkedIn is that firstly, it makes it almost too easy to apply for a job. So you get a lot of unqualified candidates because they just go, I'll apply for that one and 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 that one. And so if you're going to apply for a job you found on LinkedIn, my suggestion would be to make more of an effort to distinguish yourself from other applicants. So figure out who the hiring person is, craft a good introductory letter, maybe connect with them on LinkedIn, ask some questions up front. Just do something to distinguish yourself because you do get drowned a bit in CVs and so forth. So I'm going to rattle through a few tips on crafting an application and interviewing. I realise that some of this may be familiar to you because I understand it's the sort of thing that career services often will talk you through, so I won't dwell on it too much. But when it comes to your CV, the important thing for me is, as a group, as graduates, you don't necessarily have as much differentiation between each other when you're applying. So it's really important that you stress relevant skills and experience. So what I mean by this is, have you built something yourself? Have you ever built an app or something like that, or participated in a hackathon or a startup weekend? Have you done anything that demonstrates leadership qualities? Are you chairman of a university society, or have you run a triathlon or anything like that that just suggests to me this is someone who takes initiative and demonstrates leadership. This again is obvious, but I had to put it in because it was horrifying to me how bad the cover letters were when I was recruiting last year. So just for context, I had for the two positions I was hiring for, I had over 200 applications, and about 60% of them were dismissed just on the basis of the cover letter and CV. Because one of the things you do as a product manager is you spend a lot of time reviewing documentation, crafting messaging, deciding on how to, what a user interface should look like. If you can't write a good cover letter in good written English with proper grammar and punctuation, then I can't trust you to do those things. So I've got a fairly zero tolerance approach to that sort of thing. Another thing I used to see a lot of, which I recommend against, is people who would write a cover letter, which was perfectly well written, but all it did was repeat the stuff that was on their CV. It just said, I'm right for this role because I'm studying this at this university, and I've done this and this. And there was nothing new. There was nothing in there that told me who they were, why they found this particular role interesting, why they were right for this role. So that's what you want to do is distinguish. Your cover letter should be bespoke to that application and talk about specifically your relationship to that opportunity. Obviously, keep your online presence in order. I'm not the sort of person who checks your Facebook feed for pictures of you when you're drunk, but some people might. But I will check anything that's professional, so a LinkedIn profile, Twitter feed, that sort of thing. I did get a few people whose LinkedIn profile didn't match their CV. So on the CV they claimed they'd done one set of things, and on the LinkedIn profile they claimed they'd done another set of things, which was just a big red flag for me. It was clear that they were attempting to recast their background to fit the job they were applying for. If you're going to do that, at least make the effort to do it in both places. Okay, so assuming you get the cover letter, your CV looks good, you get through that hurdle, you'll get into the interview stage. The sorts of topics you might expect to be asked when you're interviewing for a product management role: product design, analytical, technical, and strategic. Pretty standard. I've spoken to recruiters at a number of companies now, and they pretty much all do it in a similar way. So at both Google and at Yahoo, I know that they do probably about 4 interviews, and one on product, one on design, one on product, one on analytical, one on technical. Strategy sometimes is rolled into product, design is sometimes rolled into product a bit. But you'll certainly at least get analytical, product, and technical. Some basic interview tips. Again, I'm sure this isn't news to you, but it's just worth mentioning. Don't panic. Generally speaking, this is something that is perhaps not obvious. When you're being recruited, when you're being interviewed, the person you're interviewing wants you to be good. Because you've taken an hour out of their day, and if you turn out to be rubbish, that's just an hour they'll never get back, and they get no value from at all. So they want you to do well. They're not trying to trip you up and not trying to stress you out. Don't panic, take a breath, think about the question before you answer it. Don't worry about leaving some dead air while you do that. Ask clarifying questions. Although they may not be trying to trip you up, they will probably leave some ambiguity in the question to see whether you take the initiative to explore the problem space and really understand what's happening. Because of course in reality, the behaviour of users and the requirements of a product are not that well defined until you figure that out. Be aware of your own assumptions and check them. So, for example, actually no, I'll come to that in a moment. But if they give you, as I mentioned, they want you to do well. So if they're giving you opportunities to do well, take them. In other words, if they throw you a bone, if they give you a nice open-ended question, run with it. Like, don't just give them a single answer and then stop, because they want to see what you can do. And have a conversation. What I mean by this is, when you're being interviewed, it's not just about understanding what you know or are capable of. It's about understanding whether you're the sort of person I want to spend 8 hours a day in an office with. That's really important. So you need to build up a rapport. You need to demonstrate that you're someone that will be good to be working with. Okay, so let's go through the different interview types. Product instincts. These are questions about your ability to recognise good products or think of good products. This is just an example. This question was one I was actually asked when I went through the process of converting to become a product manager at Google. And the key thing here is to start with the user, start with the person who this product is for. What I see a lot of is that I would say to you perhaps, design an app to help me find gluten-free bakeries in my neighbourhood. And some candidates will just go straight to the whiteboard and they'll draw a screen, and they'll put a map on it, and they'll put a list of businesses underneath it, and they'll go straight into implementation and UI, and they won't step back and say, well, who is this product for? Why is it needed? Why are they not being served by existing solutions? And how do we solve this problem in the most effective way possible? And so that's the important thing, is to start with, okay, who's my audience here? And you might sometimes find that there's more than one potential audience. So if, for example, I asked you to design a service to help people settle into a new city that they've just moved to, those people might be business people who've just moved there for a new job. They might be students. They might be people who've moved for family reasons. So you need to figure out what your audience is and then select one. You don't have to design a solution for every audience. You can just say, for the purposes of this answer, let's focus on this audience. And the interviewer might say, well, actually, I'd rather you focused on that. That's fine, but just be decisive, pick an audience, and then focus on that problem. Empathize again with what they need, and then understand, and then come up with as simple a solution as you can. I'm not impressed by overly elaborate, massively engineered solutions. I just want the simplest possible solution. Okay, design. So there's a couple of ways of doing this, but a very popular way is to basically just give you a particular screen or web page from a product you know well, or from the product of the company you're interviewing with, and ask you how you would improve it or how you would redesign it. The thing to do here is to first try and understand what the point of that screen is. And what I mean by that is not what function it's doing, but what goal or purpose is it serving within the product. So, and also understand a little bit about trying to understand why it looks the way it does right now. What constraints was it under when it was originally designed? So I'll give you an example. We have a page on our website which lists all the companies that you can invest in right now. And when you look at that page, you think, each of those entries takes up a third of the screen. They're big. And so consequently, this page is very, very long. You have to scroll and scroll and scroll. And you look at that and you might immediately think, why is it like that? You could really compact this down and it would be much, much easier to read. Very fair criticism. The reason is that when that page was originally designed, the company was much younger and only had a handful of companies listing at any one time, maybe 3, 4, 5. So it was designed that way so that it looked busy. So it looked like there was a lot going on. It wasn't just 3 lines and a big blank space. But times have changed, the product's moved on. It's not necessarily fit for purpose anymore. Think about not just how you would improve what you have, but what would you need to do to cope with continual growth. Like if you assume that this product is going to be 10 times as successful in 3 years' time, how would it need to change to be able to cope with that, to still give a good experience? And what should be taken out? Something like that. Very rarely do I see this. Often when I ask these questions, the candidates assume that everything on the screen is sacred, that nothing can possibly be removed. But the reality is that 50% of any product gets negligible use. And the product would probably be better off without it. And so if you can actually identify opportunities to simplify the product, that would be extremely impressive to me because it almost never happens. Okay, analytical skills. So analytical skills are about understanding your ability to solve problems, right? And to break a problem down or a challenge down into manageable pieces. And what you'll often get is what are called Fermi estimation questions. This is where you're asked, for example, how many cinema screens are in the UK, or something like another question that is often discussed online is how many planes are in the air over the US right now. And the point is that these are not, if you wanted to know the answer to that question, you would just look it up. Right? The question is, can you figure that out with little to no information, just based on breaking the problem down and then making sane estimates? And the key thing to do with these questions is firstly to figure out how you're going to do that. Sometimes there are multiple ways of doing it. So for the cinema example, one way of doing it is to say, well, how often realistically do people go to the cinema? And therefore, how many cinemas are needed to serve that level of demand? So you start with, well, the population of the UK is 65 million, thereabouts, and then you sort of extrapolate from there. Another way is to say, well, how much do we think it costs to run a cinema? How many cinemas can the market sustain from a business perspective? And then there are a number of different ways of doing it, all very valid, all perfectly reasonable. But the point is to figure that out first, and then write it up, like literally on the board. Say I'm going to do it this way, and write a quasi-equation that identifies all the things you need to figure out in order to come to an answer, and then break those down and work your way through them. One thing I should mention at the end there is sanity check the results. So what I mean by that is it's quite easy once you've got your model and you fill the gaps in to put absolute faith in it. And sometimes it lets you down. So I was mentoring someone, I was training them on how to interview. And I asked them that question I mentioned a minute ago, which was how many planes are over the US as a good exercise. And the person chose to go about this by estimating how many people are flying, and then estimating the capacity of a plane, average capacity of a plane. Perfectly good approach. Except that about 2/3 of the way through, when he got to the number of how many people he estimated are flying, his number was 100 million. And I said, okay, so what's the population of the US? And he said, 300 million. I said, do you think 1 in 3 people are in the air right now? No. And so it's just remember to, every so often, just check, are there any reasons why this is obviously way off? Okay, technical skills. So a critical part of being a product manager is not necessarily the ability to build stuff yourself, although that's certainly helpful. It's the ability to hold high bandwidth conversations with an engineering or developer team. Because ultimately, all day, every day, you're trying to figure out how you're going to get stuff done. And what you don't need is to be held back because you don't understand the core concepts that they're talking about. So what I'll often do is ask questions that really allow the person to demonstrate their level of technical comfort and competency. So this example, how would you debug a broken web page, is a good one because you can go to a variety of levels of detail on that problem. and I'll quickly get a sense of how comfortable you are with all the concepts. It's also good to understand when you're, before you go into this interview, and bear in mind that if you're talking to a recruiter, they will probably tell you what type of interview you're having and on what schedule. It's always good to understand, what does this company do? And what technology does it use to do it? Because inevitably, they will care more about your comfort with that technology. So if you look at CrowdCube right now, you'll find that we are predominantly a web-based platform. And so, sure enough, I will predominantly ask questions about web technologies. But if it was someone like CityMapper, who are predominantly a mobile app, they're going to have a different set of priorities. Okay, strategy. So strategy is about your ability to recognize that the success of a product is not just about building something that users want, it's also about the business strategy behind it. In other words, how is it going to deliver value to the business? And often that means money, but not always. These questions tend to be about how would you build a value proposition around some product. So an example here, Facebook Messenger. I've also asked people Wikipedia, those sorts of things. Sometimes you'll also get, these questions might have an element of sort of vision and forward thinking to them as well. So for example, what are the long-term ramifications of self-driving cars, something like that. The key thing to do here, firstly, is understand where the users or the consumers recognize the value to lie, because that's what they'll pay for. So to give you a concrete example, if you look at Google Maps, there's lots of features on Google Maps. One of them is driving directions. Now, the data that driving directions relies on is pretty much these days public data. It's borderline. It's essentially data that anybody can get hold of, OpenStreetMap, that sort of thing. So the value on Google's driving directions does not lie in the data, it lies in the algorithms that they built to figure out how to route effectively through that graph. If you look at Street View, all the value is in the data. Right? The actual user experience of Street View is very, very basic. It's the imagery that is where all the value lies. If you look at something like Facebook, the value is actually in the audience that you can reach through that platform. That's what people will pay for, is to get to that audience. So the first thing is to figure out where the value lies, and then brainstorm ways of monetizing that value, essentially. And don't get hung up on one approach. Just throw out lots of them, basically, and then perhaps explore a couple more in detail. And this comes back to something I forgot to mention earlier, which is the importance of sort of reading the interviewer, understand what they're interested in. Are you going into enough detail? Are you going into too much detail? And trying to plot a path through that. Okay, so if you do decide to go down this path and you apply and you get lined up for some interviews, this is a great site because it essentially helps you practice for product management interviews. It's written by someone who was planning to become a product manager themselves and wanted some easy way of testing themselves. What it does essentially is just fire questions at you with a timer, you can just sit there and you can just roll past and you think about how would I answer that question. Okay. Last thing I just wanted to mention, again, this isn't really product management specific, but I just think it's really important. It's worth 30 seconds. I speak to a lot of graduates and undergraduates who are about to start looking for a job or in the process of looking for a job. And I often see a certain degree of panic in their eyes, a certain degree of a sense that the important thing at this stage in their life is just to find a job. And it's about being selected. And I understand that, I empathise with the position you're in. But it's important to understand that when you're in an interview at a company, you should be interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. Because no matter what they tell you, no matter what perks they throw your way, no matter how much, as I say, whether they have free food or free at-desk massage or foosball tables or whatever, there are actually only three things that will make a difference as to whether you enjoy your life. Like the 40 plus hours a week you're spending in that environment. And that's, are you working with people you like? Do you enjoy the work you're doing? And is the culture around you supportive and positive? And that's, the interview is your opportunity to really understand that. Do these seem like great people? Does it sound like, ask them what you will be doing and what they expect that you'll be doing? Is that something that you would enjoy? And then, is this sort of organisation that really helps, wants you to succeed, provides you with the opportunities to succeed? All right. So this presentation is one that, as I said earlier at the beginning, that I wrote because I was worried about kind of a lack of awareness. And there's a website that goes with it, which is this website. And on that website, there's a bunch of supporting information, additional articles, blog posts, stuff that you can go to for more information, copies of the videos, including this one at some point, and also those little clips I showed earlier are actually just pieces taken out of larger sort of 5 to 6 minute interviews that I'm doing with different product managers. So they're all on here as well. Okay, and that is that. Thank you.